Appreciate our music team. You guys do great. Well, if you're joining us by live stream, we welcome you here to the Holliday Shores Baptist Church. And I'm Pastor Rob Lemon, and we've just had some wonderful time singing together. And we want God to be glorified in our midst. That's what we just sang. And so God bless all of us who love His name. Well, this fall we've been talking about the fact that Jesus is coming back and that Jesus is going to come back soon. The signs are in place. The Bible has given us many indications of what it will be like in the last day and the time right before He comes for His second coming. And we see those things in place even today. And so, brother and sister, we ought to get ready. And John says, if you really believe He's coming back, it should purify our lives. It should make us uniquely different. We should be drawing closer to the ideal that God puts out for us believers to live. And that's what we should strive for. Now, we're going to move the subject forward a little bit, that when Jesus comes back, He's going to destroy some things. Now, that shouldn't surprise us at all, because the fact of the matter is, He says that when you're saved, you cross over from death to life. The old order of things is gone, the new has come, and He makes us different. And so when He comes back to our world, you should expect that He's going to make some changes, some wonderful changes. And He's got to get rid of some of the things that are in our world right now so that our world actually can be restored to a world better than Eden. Now, two of the targets that He's going to try to hit, and I guess it's on His kill list, we find them in Revelation 17 and 18. They both come under the title of Babylon, but in chapter 17, it's a religious Babylon. It's a mystery Babylon. And it's a worldwide religion, and I think it's all of the false religions and religious lies of our day that all come together into one real super slick religion in the last days. We see that coming together even today. And all we're waiting for, I think, is probably the false prophet that the Bible speaks about, and all the religions of this world will become one. Of course, God's kids will be gone before that, and those that are left would just be Christians who really don't believe the Bible or Scripture or Jesus, and they will fit right in to that global world religion. But that's all in Revelation 17, and we're not going to really spend a whole lot of time there. I want to talk to you today about the cultural Babylon in Revelation 18. This is a wicked and ungodly culture that causes pain and unmitigated grief to humans. It's also the thing that distracts us and keeps people from the truth. Now, if you want a New Testament word that is frequently used for this Babylonian cultural thing, it's called the world, the world. And this morning I want to talk about them. Both of these in 17 and 18 in Revelation are called Babylon because they have their post-flood roots in the city of Babylon and in the dictator that first set up a country and a dictatorship and so on after the flood, and his name was Nimrod. We'll talk about him in just a little bit. But actually, the culture actually starts earlier than that. And so I want to take us back into Genesis, and we'll talk a little bit about the families. But out of Nimrod's culture, see, God's going to destroy it. Out of Nimrod's Babylon came the culture or the atmosphere that the human family lives in. And it's the second target that Jesus is going to destroy when He comes. So I think it's important that we talk about this. Now, here's the indictment against cultural Babylon, and I'm not going to read all of chapter 18 to you, just make some points. And you can go back later today or sometime this week when you have a chance and just read through that chapter. But here's the indictment against cultural Babylon. First of all, it's a system that is so evil and wicked that rebellious demonic spirits feel right at home in it. Human culture has been overrun by demonic ideas and ways, and the sin nature absolutely loves it. You can put down verse 2 there in 18, where it talks about that. Now in verses 4 and 5, it produces the accepted norm of how we think today, how we behave today. It is totally ungodly. It's filled with violence and immorality and greed and selfishness and everything else that the sin nature loves. That's what the Babylonian cultural system is like. That's what the world is like. Now in chapter 17, verse 2, and again in 18, verse 3, Satan uses that Babylonian system to do something. And basically what he's doing is he's using it to make people just relax. And they're on a real fast track to the lake of fire, to judgment, to death. And Satan wants us to be distracted by so many things. And so that's what he does. He engineered this Babylonian system. And so it puts humans at ease. It puts them in the crowd. They get to do what everybody else is doing. But in the whole time, they're racing toward judgment and hell. See, the sin nature has fallen in love with the world's tasty ways. But the more it drinks of her wine and her pleasures, the more it puts that sinner into a fall-down, drunken stupor that leads it right into that eternal destruction. So they're drunk and drunk over the world, and they don't even realize they're racing toward destruction. But that's what Satan has used the world system to do. And then I want you to notice that in chapter 18, verse 20, and again in verse 24, she hates and kills God's prophets and saints. She has no love at all for anybody who's a believer and a follower in the Lord Jesus Christ. And so they oppose her, and she opposes them, and she's responsible for vast numbers of death of God's people across the country. So this is the Babylonian system is the world. And you know, we've become so used to living in the Babylonian demonic culture in which we live that we don't even get shocked by it anymore. I mean, we've made excuses, we feel comfortable, but if you notice chapter 18 and verses 4 and 5, here's God's word to us. And he says, "Then I heard another voice from heaven say, 'Come out of her, my people. Don't be like this cultural system. Don't think the way they do. Don't act the way they do. Come out from her so that you will not share in her sins, so that you will not receive any of her plagues. For her sins are piled up to heaven, and God has remembered her crimes.'" So God's going to destroy it, and he doesn't want any of his people to be a part of it. And that's a warning for us today, even as we await the rapture. We have to understand what the world is doing in our lives, and we have to change direction and escape from it. Now, this morning I want to describe that culture by showing you where it started and what characterizes it. And we're going to move pretty fast through this. I think the story, at least part of this, you're going to be pretty familiar with. But we're going to be comparing and contrasting two different families. And those families are, the first one we're going to look back at is back in Genesis chapter 4. So if you'll take your Bible and go back there. And we meet two of Adam's sons. One is Cain. The other is Abel. We're familiar with the Cain and Abel story because we remember that Cain killed Abel. But what we may not understand is that Cain started a family. And that family was characterized by certain things. And Abel did not start a family because he was killed too young, but there was a young man that stepped into his place to become the family head, and that was Seth. And so I'll either be calling this other family the Abel-Seth family, or I'll call it the Seth family. So they're both the same. They both had the same kind of hearts, and they passed on to the next generation some of the very same similar things. So this world culture, this Babylon, if you will, all started with Adam's son, Cain. Now let's consider Cain just a little bit. Cain was probably the firstborn of Adam and Eve. It seems to be that. She says there in verse 1, with the help of the Lord, I have brought forth a man. I think she's going, wow, this is how we're going to have kids, because it was a new experience for her as well. And then later she gave birth to his brother Abel. Now we don't know if Abel was the second born or if he was on down the list somewhere else. Adam and Eve had a lot of kids, undoubtedly. And these two boys were different. Abel kept flocks, it says there in verse 2. Cain worked the soil. Now, I'm just going to give you the attitudes of Cain's family so we can understand where that particular family was coming from. This is what the family passed down to the next generation. This is how they felt about life. This is their rules for the family. Did your family have rules? Certain things you had to do or you couldn't do? Cain's family had rules, and these were the rules. A lot of it came out of the way they behaved and the way they thought. The first thing we notice about it is that he had a disobedient religion. Now, it's quite obvious as you study the passage that God had come along to Adam and Eve and their children and said, in order to cover sin, I want you to offer to me, or as you worship me, I want you to come with a blood sacrifice. Now, we know today why he was doing that, because he was going to be pointing forward thousands of years to the Lamb of God who gave his blood, who shed his blood so that we might be forgiven. So he's planting that picture in the world that Adam and Eve and Cain and Abel and the whole family, all the kids, lived in. So he said, I want you to bring a sacrifice of a lamb and kill that lamb on the altar, and that's how you're to worship me. That's what you're to use when you pray to me. And it's interesting that these two boys had two different reactions. One says, yes, that's what I'll do. But Cain said, you got to be kidding me. I don't want to do that. He was disobedient. Instead, he was a man of the soil, so he went out and got himself some carrots and probably some broccoli and beets, most certainly. I don't like those very much. But he brought all those, put them on an altar, and said, here, God, I want to give you the fruit of my hands. And God said, I won't accept that. I want blood. And Cain says, I don't want to give you what you want. I want to give you what I want. I want to manufacture my own religion and do it my own way. And that sounds like today, doesn't it? Do it my own way. So he wanted to give him a veggie sacrifice and not a blood sacrifice. And from that day on, let me tell you something, you can't build a great society if you disconnect from God. You can't have a stable country, a great country, if you disconnect from God and his principles. And right on that day, Cain made the decision, I'm going to build my life without God. I don't want him to be a part of my world. And so we see everything that comes out of his family from then on is a subtraction of God out of his family. Now let me just go quickly here. God comes back to him and basically says, I can't accept that offering. It's not the one I wanted. And Cain was not very happy with that. It says there that, verse 4, Abel brought fat portions from some of the firstborn of his flock. The Lord looked with favor on Abel and his offering, but on Cain and his offering he did not look with favor. So Cain was very angry and his face was downcast. He got really depressed and discouraged and upset and angry over this. And so he was really displeased that God would not accept his sacrifice and his offering, and he just got madder and madder. And then he started to think, it's interesting, we don't want to deal with our own sin, but we'll deal with others, or the things that we think are wrong in others. And he had to start thinking about, I'm tired of my brother. Because I think Abel was coming around saying, brother, let's just do what God says. God has been so good to us. He's blessed us in so many ways. Why don't we just follow through? Maybe the shed blood of a lamb is really important to the God story that he's developing here in the family. And I think Abel came to him and was preaching, and the scripture tells us he was a preacher. But he started to think, if I can just get rid of the voice in my head that tells me I'm not doing right, and that voice is coming from my brother, I'm going to get rid of him. I don't know that there's death in the family up to that point, but I guess he figured if he hit him over the head hard enough with a rock, it might silence him. Now, we don't know exactly how he killed him, but Cain was really angry. But God comes to him and says, Cain, why are you angry? Why is this discouraging you so much? If you do what is right, will you not be accepted? But if you do not what's right, sin is crouching at your door. It desires to have you, but you must master it. And Cain could not be undissuaded from his sin. I think I'd think twice if God was telling me this is not the way you should go. Don't you think you'd be thinking about that? Yet, he couldn't be. Even God's talking to him. Even God is giving him reasons why he shouldn't do what he's thinking about doing and killing his brother. And he can't be dissuaded from his path. He killed Abel anyway. And so we see that he was really demanding. He was really self-centered. I'm going to get what I want. I'm going to do what I want to do. I'm going to kill to get my way. Whatever it takes, get out of my way. I want what I want, and I want it now. And I want that voice of my brother to shut up, and I don't want to hear him anymore. And so verse 8 says, Now Cain said to his brother Abel, let's go out to the field. And while they were in the field, Cain attacked his brother Abel and killed him. The first murder in the human family. The first murder of so many others that were going to follow. I think heaven must have been awestruck. How could you do that? But see, he was so demanding for himself, he didn't care. He didn't give a rip what his parents thought or anybody else. He wanted what he wanted, and he wanted it now, and he wanted to do what he wanted to do. Sounds like our culture today. We make up our own rules, don't we? I want to do what I want to do. Then God came back to him and began to talk to him. He says, verse 9, where's your brother Abel? Where is he? Well, Cain turns right around and starts to deny his sin and his culpability. He answers God. He says, I don't know. Am I my brother's keeper? You can't lie to God and get away with it. At some point, you're going to be called to account. And God says back to him, what have you done? I think that was a question to make him think. He should have gone, oh my, I just killed my brother. What have I done? But it seems he doesn't even think that. His heart is so hardened by that time, it doesn't even bother him what he did. So he's denying his sin. He will not admit his sin at all. And then God says, okay, your brother's blood is crying out to me from the ground. And verse 11, now you're under a curse and driven from the ground. Remember, he's a guy that loved farming and growing things. And God says, because you put your brother's blood in the ground is not going to cooperate with you anymore. He says, when you work the ground, it'll no longer yield its crops for you. You'll be a restless wanderer on the earth. Now, maybe at that point he would have understood. But what does he do? He's disgruntled with the punishment. He goes, God, this is not fair. See verse 13, Cain said to the Lord, my punishment is more than I can bear. Today you're driving me from the land, and I will be hidden from your presence, and I'll be a restless wanderer on the earth, and whoever finds me will kill me. I, me. He turns it and makes it into him about himself. He's disgruntled with the punishment. And God's punishment was to make him think. You know, in fact, the punishment almost seems lesser than it could or maybe should have been. Because later on in the law, if you took somebody's life, your life was taken. But in this particular case, God didn't do that. So he was merciful. Cain should have been on his knees before God going, thank you for your mercy. I know what I did. It was awful. It was terrible. You should take my life in exchange. But that's not what he's doing. And so he's disgruntled with the punishment. And then we see number 7, he's distanced from God and his family. And so verse 16 says, Cain went out from the Lord's presence and lived in the land of Nod, east of Eden. And it's almost there like it says that Cain he walked away from his family, his relationships, his God, and it's like he lost everything that was important right then. But it was something he did. It's something he wanted. And so that's what he got, distanced. Now, before we keep building that list, I want to talk a little bit about this next fellow we meet, because verse 17 in chapter 4 says that Cain lay with his wife. She became pregnant and gave birth to Enoch. And then Cain was building a city, and he named it after his son Enoch. Enoch was born Irad, and Irad was the father of, and you see some father of. And then we meet a guy at the end of that list by the name of Lamech, Lamech. Now that's 7 generations down. So it's important that we remember that, because we're going to look at the other family line and see what happened after 7 generations. Now, you know, when you plant a seed of wickedness like Cain did, it grows up and it produces a lot more wickedness. And so, you know, it's amazing how sins pass down through families. And even Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, they had problems with lying. And it just passed down through the generations. And then you get down to, Joseph's brothers. Boy, they pulled off a whopper lie. Told old dad that Joseph was dead, and they had really sold him as a slave and sent him off to Egypt. So lying was a problem in that family. But we should expect that when Cain planted this seed of wickedness and rebellion and self-centeredness and not willing to deal with sin, that eventually it was going to just overwhelm his family. Well, that's what we see happening here. So we meet this fellow by the name of Lamech. And this is the characteristics after 7 generations. Now we're going to come back and finish your list, because I got a few more to go there, but let's deviate off just a little bit here and to show you some of the things that were going on. So we have Lamech. Now the first thing I want you to notice is what they call his sword song. His sword song. And this is chapter 4 and verse 23. Lamech said to his wives, we'll come back to that, Ada and Zillah, listen to me, wives of Lamech, hear my words. I have killed a man for wounding me. Now, what had Cain done? He'd killed his brother. Murder stayed in the family. I have killed a man for wounding me, a young man for injuring me. So he's claiming self-defense. This guy wounded me and I killed him. If Cain is avenged 7 times, then Lamech 77 times. I didn't point out in the story that Cain was complaining and whining and saying, if you send me out and I go out, somebody's going to find me and kill me. You know, one of my brothers and sisters is going to come after me because I killed Abel, their brother. and they're going to kill me. And God said, I'm not going to let that happen. And so if somebody does come after you, I'm going to put a lot of pressure on them. See, verse 15, if anyone kills Cain, he will suffer vengeance 7 times over. And then God put a mark on Cain so nobody would harm him. And Lamech is saying, if Cain can get away with murder and God will avenge him 7 times, then I will be avenged 77 times. Now, what you may not really read into this is there's a lot of attitude. There's a real bad attitude in this. This guy has a chip on his shoulder, and it's very large. I think if I were writing the song to show you the attitude that I think he had, it would be something like this. I killed a kid who hurt me. Nobody hurts me, you see. Nobody. And I will not answer to a judge. I'll do what I aspire, because it's all about me. I can protect myself, unlike wimpy Grandpa Cain. If you pick on me, watch out. Don't get in my way. And then the chorus of that had to be this: me first, no other plan will do. I will not bend the knee. I worship me and me alone. I think I've tried to bring out I think that's the attitude he was living his life. I'm going to do what I want to do, and don't you touch me, don't you get in my way, because if you do, you're in trouble, because I won't accept that. Now, another thing you probably noticed there. So this guy's got a bad attitude. You noticed he had 2 wives? Well, wait a minute. How did we get 2 wives? I mean, I thought it was Adam and Eve. I thought that was God's plan. 1 man, 1 woman, married together for life. That was God's plan. So what do we have here? We have a man who has become the first bigamist. He's got 2 wives. There was a day he looked God in the face and said, I don't care that you want 1 man and 1 woman together for life. I'm going to do what I want to do. I'm marrying 2 of them, and I found 2 cuties. Now, the names of these 2 women are really interesting, and I want to tell you right up front, I'm not against jewelry or cosmetics, but it's kind of interesting what it says, and just looking at the names themselves. Now, he had this wife, Ada, and her name meant adornment. And you kind of get the idea that she learned to accessorize herself with jewelry. That seems to indicate what her name is all about. So her name is adornment or ornament, and she knew how to use bracelets, and she knew how to use earrings, and I don't know what all she would have, maybe things on her head. Then his other wife was Zillah, and her name means shade. And on the basis of what her name means, it seems like she may have been the one that started using cosmetics. Again, I'm telling you, I'm not against, and I don't think the Scripture is teaching here necessarily about jewelry or cosmetics, although God says a woman's beauty shouldn't be outward, it should be inward. But you see what's going on here. The focus has become outward. Doesn't matter what the heart is. We're in a culture and a society that is only interested in the outside. I'll tell you, young man, young woman, you don't want to just marry somebody tall, dark, and handsome or beautiful, because that inside will, if it's the right inside, you can live with a person for a long, long, long time till death do you part. If it's only outward, you're in trouble. You can be ugly on the inside and beautiful on the outside, and you're a mess. The best way to be is to be beautiful on the inside. That makes you beautiful on the outside, and that's an easy person to live with. And so the emphasis becomes on the outward, and that's the way Cain's world operates. You know, I watch television. I watch as few commercials as I possibly can. So I like to record things and then hit the fast button, and I pass by all the cartoons, or the commercials. But you know, they always talk about the beauty on the outside, don't they? That's the pressure today. You got to be thin, in shape, look good, cosmetics and ornamentation, and that's where it started. Ada and Zilla. Somebody said once, with women like that, you probably have trouble from A to Z. I think that just might be true. Oh, by the way, Lamech also had a daughter. There she is. Her name was Naamah, and her name means beautiful or pleasant, sweet, delightful, beautiful. The name also roots in singer. So maybe she was singing some of her dad's songs. Don't know about that. But based on the words you're hearing here, when I was thinking this thing through, it seems like she was probably one hot chick. And I wonder and because her name is included in this whole display of rebellion against God, why would God put her name there? Well, she was doing something that was rebelling against what God had in mind. And, you know, it doesn't really tell us, but I wonder if she was really one hot chick. She was really beautiful, and she's really pleasant, and she's a good singer and all that. I wonder if she went around trying to teach women that they didn't have to be so down to earth and modest like Grandma Eve. I don't know. But I think that in the midst of all the rebellion, Grandma and Grandpa Eve and Adam and Eve, they're trying to teach their kids and grandkids the right ways and modesty. And I get the sense that maybe this lady was not really for that and maybe taught against it. There's another thing here that we ought to notice about Lamech is he detested the curse they were living under. Remember in the garden, God had put them under a curse. There's going to be pain. The ground is not going to grow things for you, and so on. And so they're living under the curse. And I think that when God told Adam and Eve that life would be difficult and challenging because of the curse, and there's going to be pain and weeds and everything else, I think that Cain's family decided we're not willing to live under that curse. We're going to try to turn the earth into the best place we can make it, and we will be comfortable and at ease without God. We don't need Him. I don't care if He said He would send somebody to get us out of this mess. We're going to make the world as nice as we can. So they were going to show the Creator that they could make this earth okay. And we wouldn't live under the curse. And so notice we meet now some of his kids. And let's see here. Yeah, back in verse 20. Ada gave birth to Jabal. He was the father of those who live in tents and raise livestock. So Jabal, his firstborn, led the way in discovering ways to enjoy the world. His priority was a life that was comfortable and easy and satisfying. And it appears that he developed the concept of a dwelling place, a place that he could call his own and where he could surround himself with all kinds of beautiful and pleasurable things. He learned that animals could provide him with delicious foods and comfortable products and lots of labor. And the human family applauded and adopted his ideals. And then we see the second son, verse 21. His brother's name was Jubal. He was the father of all who play the harp and the flute. So this guy's a musician. And so he brightened humans' emotions by inventing and playing musical instruments. Now again, I'm not sure there's anything wrong with that. I don't think there is. But it's in the context here of a wicked family, and I think the direction was away from God. So they're using, Jabal's using his discoveries to move them away from God, and Jubal is using music to move people away from God. And that's still happening today. And then the third son is, Zillah also had a son, Tubal-Cain, who forged all kinds of tools out of bronze and iron. And so he learned how to mine ores and mix metals. So he was probably making some of his brother's instruments, and he was making tools, and then he's making weapons, and all out of a spirit of rebellion against God. Jude, talking about false prophets, false teachers, says, "Woe to them, they have taken the way of Cain." So they're going the way Cain's family. So they were so successful, though, that the human family's been following them the whole way down to now. Now let's go back and finish our list, shall we? Oh, there I had. That's pretty much what we just talked about. So number 8, Cain's family attitudes, they had deviant marriage. Well, let's just make marriage any old way we want it. Man, woman, and any combination you want. That's where we are today. And then he was very defiant in attitude. We tried to point that out. There was the decoration emphasis, the outward and not the inward. The emphasis on things that, the heart matters. That's what the person is. And the outward, you can change that. Good grief, you can have blue hair one week and white hair the next and gold hair the next, and you can change everything, but it's the heart that's the stable thing. And then they detested the curse. They detested the curse. I'm going to have to speed up just a little bit here. Let's talk a little bit about the Abel-Seth family line. This is the other son of Adam. Abel was killed, and Seth picked it up. First of all, we notice about them, they deferred to God's ways. Abel said, "I'm going to bring an offering that God wanted us to bring." And so he brought the animal, the sheep, the ram. He'd sacrifice a blood offering. And he's teaching his kids, let's worship God in the way he commanded us to do it. He's passing that on down the line. We know, secondly, that he was devoted to righteousness, to God's ways. 1 John 3:12 says, "Don't be like Cain, who belonged to the evil one and murdered his brother." And why did he murder him? Because his own actions were evil and his brothers were righteous. So God looks down and says, Abel did what was right. That means Abel's heart was committed to what was right. And when Seth picked it up after Abel, his heart was the same way. I want to do what's right before God. I want to be righteous before God. And it would seem that from that day on, they were really determined to connect with God himself. An incredible thing. Notice in chapter 5 and verse 21, this Enoch is not of the other line. The two families named their kids very much the same, and I'm guessing Cain was taking the family names of the godly line, but you can study that on your own. When Enoch had lived 65 years, he became the father of Methuselah, and after he became the father of Methuselah, Enoch walked with God 300 years and had other sons and daughters. And altogether, Enoch lived 365 years. Enoch walked with God, then he was no more because God took him away. He was, this family was devoted to God. They were determined to connect with God, and they were really practicing it. So every father was teaching his kids, now the most important thing in life is, I want you to connect with God. I want you to learn to know God. I want you to learn to love God. I want you to learn to trust God. That's the most important thing you can do. And so that's what they were doing. And Seth planted this seed of righteousness in his family. And after 7 generations, it seems that they had worked on it. And by the time of Enoch, he knew how to walk with God. And God loved their conversation so much, it seems like after 365 years, they're out walking around together, and God just said, you know, it's time for me to go home and you to go home, but I'll tell you what, I've enjoyed this walk so much. You always go to your home, why don't you come to mine? And God took him. I think here we have an Old Testament rapture, if anything. Oh, I should show you too, verse 26, which I didn't point out. At that time, so this is in the time of Seth, at that time men began to call on the name of the Lord. That's their commitment. That's what Seth thought his family should do. And so they're worshiping God, they're praying to God, they're focusing on God. And by the 7th generation, there's so much success in that, in those families, that Enoch just walked with God, and then he was no more because God took him. And then we have Methuselah, and we have Lamech, and we have Noah. And the 4th thing I want you to notice here is they're really deferential to God, looking to God to remove the curse. And we know this from chapter 4, verse 28, because here's Lamech, and this is not the bigamist, this is in the other family line. It says that when he had lived 182 years, he had a son. And he named him Noah and said, he will comfort us in the labor and painful toil of our hands caused by the ground the Lord has cursed. Now, what does that mean? You remember God had told Eve, one of your kids is going to bash the head of the serpent. And they took that to mean there's a deliverer coming. Eve is going to have a child, and one of those children down the line is going to restore us to Eden. It's going to resolve our lives. And so when Noah is born, Lamech looks at him and goes, and by the way, his name means rest, if I remember right. This is the one. Maybe this is the one. God made us this promise. Maybe this kid, Noah, maybe he'll be the one that'll restore us. He was wrong about that, but you see the faith of his heart? And he was believing God. He was deferring to God. They weren't trying to get out from under the curse except by God's way and God's man. Now, did this family sing and have music? They probably did. But I bet it was a big difference from the music that Lamech and his 2 wives and all his kids were singing. Did they use metals? Yeah, but I'll bet they were using them for different things than the other family did. Did they use animals? Yes, they probably did, but it was a different emphasis. Did they live in tents? They probably did, but it was a different emphasis. It wasn't in rebellion against God. Do you know what? The end result of this. Do you know that God wiped Cain's family out in the flood? There's nobody on earth today that's a descendant of Cain in the bloodline. God said this family is not worth keeping on earth because they just got worse and worse. See, that little seed that Cain planted just grew into wickedness by the 7th generation, and then more and more and more until the whole world doesn't have one good thought. It's just evil continually. That's what God told Noah. So God judged Cain and his family and their attitudes as worthless. You know, the Abel-Seth family continued through and after the flood in the person of Noah. All of us here can trace back to Noah and through one of his 3 sons. Now, after the flood, Cain's family was outside the ark and they died. Seth's family was inside the ark and they survived. Now, after the flood, Cain's ways were advanced by a fellow by the name of Nimrod. And so we meet him in Genesis 10. Cush, who was Noah's grandson, was the father of Nimrod. So we have Noah and then Ham and then Cush. Then Nimrod, who grew to be a mighty warrior on the earth. He was a mighty hunter before the Lord. That's why it said, like Nimrod, a mighty hunter before the Lord. Now we know that his name means let us rebel. And it seems from the words in the text that he was somebody who set himself against God. And he's going, we're not going to give God what he wants. We're going to fight against God. We're going to gather together in communities, and we're going to do what we want. And they brought back really the whole Cain thing. The same sins, the same rebellions, and so on. And they were trying to reap souls so that God couldn't have them. They're trying to turn people against God. So the ways of Cain are up and running again, and as a matter of fact, they've come right down to our day. They've come right down to our day. Matthew 24:37 says, as it was in the days of Noah, so it'll be at the coming of the Son of Man. Cain's family attitudes will dominate culture in the days before the flood. We have a picture of the Cain-Nimrod family rules in the end times. They're in 2 Timothy chapter 3, verses 1 through 5. Paul's writing Timothy, and he says, you may know this as well, Timothy. It's going to be really something in the last days. People are going to love only themselves and their money. They'll be boastful and proud, sneering at God, disobedient to their parents, ungrateful to them, thoroughly bad. They'll be hard-headed and never give in to others. They will be constant liars and troublemakers and will think nothing of immorality. They will be rough and cruel and sneer at those who try to be good. They will betray their friends. They'll be hot-headed, puffed up with pride, and prefer good times to worshiping God. They will go to church, yes, but they really won't believe anything they hear. That's Cain. That's Cain's family. That's the fruit of his lifestyle. So here we have two families. We have the Cain-Nimrod family. It's an established culture that's characterized by rebellion and self-centeredness. There's no focus on God, and they have no time for God. They don't have a relationship with him. They're not looking for God to send someone from heaven to help us. We can help ourselves. We can do it ourselves. But they're out there trying to help themselves and make life whatever they can, as good as they can, and they're looking for comfort and ease and trying to make this life as easy as possible. And that's where our world is today. And they don't know they're on the verge of destruction and disaster when Jesus comes. And Seth's family, on the other hand, are looking at God and truth and worship and relationship. That's what's important to them. It's a heart thing toward God. They live under God's curse just like everybody else, but they're waiting for the one that God said would come and free them from the curse. And they're waiting for Jesus. And their lives and their families are focused on God and his ways. And that's the Seth family line. So today, here's our question. Do I look more like Cain's kid or Seth's kid? Which family does it look like I belong in? What are the priorities of my life? Is it ease, fun, gain, comfort, doing my thing like Cain's family? Or is my life run by a real passion to know Jesus like Seth's family? How am I using my time in this world, trying to find the most comfortable way to live, to gain, to settle down? Or am I using my physical body and physical mind in the time that God has given me to learn to know him and walk with him? Here's the bottom line. We must be Seth's kids while living in a world run by Cain's family. And we must be Jesus' kids while living in a world run by the devil's family. Wow. It's a big assignment. Which family are we a part of? This morning, if you're a part of Cain's family and God just hasn't been much on your list, I invite you to make a change. Come to know Jesus here today. And after our service, let's talk. Let's get together And you can receive Jesus Christ, and He'll change your life. He'll forgive your sin. He'll take out the old and bring in a new. It'll be different, be unique. And if you're a Christian, Jesus is coming to destroy some of the things that our hearts love too much. Maybe we ought to get rid of them now. Think it through. Father in heaven, thank you so much that you know all about our lives, and I pray that you'll teach us to be a part of Seth's family, to really emphasize that in our lives and in our attitudes and in our passions in these days here before Jesus comes. The Nimrod family, the Babylonian family, that culture is going to be destroyed. And you tell us as believers to come out from it. Don't be a part of it, that we might not have to pay for their sins. So, Father, help us, bless us, and teach us to live as children of Abel and Seth and Jesus. Father, save that soul today who's still lost. In Jesus' name, amen.